In the time when darkness ruled not only the night, but the hearts of men, one profession thrived in silence: assassins. Not the legendary figures of stories, but broken souls forged in pain, raised in shadows, and forgotten by history. Tonight, we walk their path, a path soaked in cold blood and fear. So before we begin this journey into the life of a medieval killer, take a moment, light a candle, silence your mind. And if you find stories like these worth your time, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Now close your eyes and let the story begin. In the year of plague 1312, the world is not ruled by kings or popes, but by fear. Fear of illness, fear of war, fear of the unknown creeping through the woods at night. And from this fear, a child is born into silence. He has no name. Not because he is unworthy, but because names are for the living, for those who are meant to be remembered. The midwife who pulls him from his mother's cold body doesn't cry out in joy. She doesn't swaddle him in fine cloth or whisper prayers. She simply wraps him in old rags, sets him by the hearth and waits to see if he draws breath. He does. Some say fate chose him. Others say fate abandoned him. But those who trained him know better. He was not chosen, not spared. He was taken. When he is 5 winters old, his village lies half dead. Plague has swept through like fire over dry hay. He no longer cries when he sees corpses. He simply walks past them, stepping carefully over the dead as if they were puddles. One evening, as ash falls like snow from burning homes, a stranger arrives. Cloaked in black, the figure says nothing. He moves like shadow, but his eyes are the color of steel. He surveys the village, looking not for survivors, but for the forgotten, the small, the silent, the ones no one would miss. The boy is found near the well, hands trembling from cold, eyes wide with hunger. He does not speak, he doesn't need to. The stranger kneels, places a hand on the boy's head, and nods. No words. No comfort, only choice. The next morning, the boy leaves the village for the last time. There is no farewell. No one sees him go. He is led through dense forests and across frozen rivers, traveling far beyond any land he has known. Eventually, the trees thicken, the sky darkens, and the stars seem to vanish from the heavens. They arrive at a place hidden in the heart of the Black Forest. A stone fortress, almost invisible among the cliffs and evergreens. It has no banners, no bells, no priests. Just high walls, narrow towers, and silence. Inside, the boy meets others like him. Children taken from ruins, war camps and graveyards. None speak their real names. Some do not speak at all. They are called by numbers or traits. Red for the girl with blood-colored hair. Crow for the boy who watches everything. Ash for the one who never cries. The boy is called Moth, quiet, pale, and drawn to the warmth of candlelight. Training begins not with swords or knives, but with hunger. They are not fed regularly. Food must be earned through silence, through obedience, through surviving tasks meant to break the weak. climbing the cold stone tower barefoot, standing still in the snow for hours, catching rats with bare hands. If they fail, they are punished. Not with lashes, but with deprivation. No blanket, no fire, no food. If they cry, no one comforts them. If they fall, no one helps them up. Moth learns quickly. He learns to move without sound, to breathe without being seen. He learns how to slip through narrow spaces, how to pick locks with fish bones, and how to count steps in pitch black. He learns to listen, always listen. The masters rarely speak. When they do, it's to teach one lesson. Your body is a weapon. Your mind is the sheath. Do not let the blade slip. At night the children lie on stone beds under thin blankets. The only warmth comes from stolen memories, of bread still warm, of a mother's lullaby, of sunlight on skin. But those memories fade quickly, and what replaces them is purpose. One night, Moth watches the stars from a crack in the stone wall. The moon is sharp and silver. A shadow approaches, one of the older boys. "Do you remember your village?" he asks quietly. Moth shakes his head. Maybe he does. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he chooses not to. "Good," the boy says. "Memory is a weakness. Here, we're all ghosts anyway. In the coming months, the training grows harder. They are taught to fight, not like knights or soldiers, but like vermin. Quick, dirty, final. They use poisons made from plants that grow only in shadowed corners of the keep. They practice with silent blades, garrots, and darts. They learn the anatomy of the human body, not to heal it, but to break it. Where to strike to silence a scream, where to cut to kill swiftly, where to press to cause pain, but not death. Failure is not punished with scolding, it is punished with witnessing. If one fails, another suffers. This creates a bond of fear, a web of accountability. Moth becomes precise. Not because he enjoys the training, but because he understands the cost of error. He learns that control is everything. A heartbeat too soon or too late can be death. His masters begin to take notice. He is not the strongest nor the fastest, but he is the quietest, the most observant, and the most obedient. At 7 winters old, Moth is sent on his first trial. He is given no weapon, only a vial of sleeping draught and a map scratched into bone. His task: enter a merchant's home, retrieve a sealed scroll from beneath the floorboards, and leave without being seen. If he is caught, he must not speak. If he is wounded, he must return alone. He succeeds. No praise is given, no reward offered, only a nod from the master, and a bowl of warm stew placed beside his sleeping place. In this world, that is the highest honor, but in the quiet of the night as he eats alone, something stirs in him. Not pride, not happiness, just silence. A hollow that nothing seems to fill. He curls beside the wall, watching the shadows move, and whispers the only word he still remembers from his old life: Mother. It hangs in the air like smoke, then vanishes, and so begins the making of an assassin, not through rage or greed or vengeance, but through absence. The absence of warmth, of choice, of anything but the mission. He will become what they demand, A blade in the dark, unseen and unforgettable. This is where his story begins. Years pass like falling leaves, silent, steady and forgotten. Moth, now 10 winters old, no longer remembers his age unless asked. Time means nothing here. The sun does not rise to greet them, and no feast marks a birthday. There is only routine, brutal, calculated and endless. The keep has many rooms, most of which are never seen. Hidden chambers, locked doors, whispered footsteps. The children are forbidden from asking questions. Curiosity, the masters say, is the first step toward betrayal. But still they wonder, what lies beneath the floorboards? Who walks behind the walls? Where do the failed ones go? Sometimes a child vanishes, no farewell, no warning. They are replaced by silence. The kind of silence that seeps into the stone and makes the torches flicker. Moth learns to stop wondering, or rather, to wonder without letting it show. He begins each day in darkness, rising before dawn's light dares touch the forest. The first trial is silence, absolute perfect silence during the morning drill. A single sound, even a footstep on stone, brings punishment. Sometimes it's food taken away, sometimes it's worse. After drills they spar in pairs, bare hands, no mercy. Each blow teaches them control, to strike without anger, to defend without fear, to fight not to win, but to survive. Moth fights Ash, the boy who never cries. Ash is larger, stronger, faster, but Moth is calm. He studies the way Ash blinks when faking a punch, the twitch in his shoulder before a kick. He loses the fight, but only barely. And the master, watching from the shadows, takes note. Later, Moth is taken aside. He is led down a narrow hallway into a chamber he's never seen before. Inside, an old man sits cross-legged on a cushion, surrounded by scrolls and herbs. "You are quiet," the man says. His voice is gentle, but his eyes are sharp. Moth nods. Quiet minds are useful, but still water hides deep rivers. "Tell me, what do you think of pain?" Moth hesitates, then answers honestly, "It teaches." The old man smiles. Good. This man becomes his new teacher. His name is never spoken aloud, but the others call him the Leech, for his knowledge of poisons and pressure points. Under the Leech's tutelage, Moth learns more than fighting. He learns patience, how to read lips across a crowded hall, how to imitate accents after hearing only a few words, how to fold his body into a basket to hide inside a merchant's cart. He learns the language of silence. At night, he is sent into the woods, alone, with tasks designed to test every sense. Retrieve an owl feather from the treetops without waking. The roost. Cross a river without disturbing the water. Follow a lantern's glow without being seen. One night, the forest speaks back. A wolf, not a metaphor. A real snarling beast, yellow eyes locked on him from the underbrush. Moth does not run. He reaches for the powder hidden in his satchel, moss and ash mixed with deer musk. He blows it toward the beast. The wolf growls, shakes its head, and disappears into the brush. The next day, the master calls him before the fire. No praise, just an object, a small silver ring carved with a moth's wings. "You have earned your symbol." the master says. From now on, you are no longer a child. You are an apprentice. The ring is worn not for pride, but for proof. Proof that you are now permitted to kill. Moth wears it on a chain around his neck, hidden beneath his tunic. He touches it at night sometimes, not as comfort, but as reminder. Nothing is given. Everything must be taken, and soon more will be required. Apprentices are given missions, low risk at first: spying, message delivery, surveillance, silent theft. Moth is sent to a nearby town posing as an orphan stable boy. He must learn the eye, names of local guards, the habits of a nobleman, and the contents of a sealed chest. He spends 2 weeks watching, listening, drawing maps in his mind. He discovers the guard with a limp takes an extra drink every 3rd night, that the nobleman's clerk sleeps during sermons, that the chest is moved only during storms. He returns, reports, and is not congratulated, but he is given a blade. It is small, curved and plain. No jewels, no crest, just steel sharpened to silence. His final test as an apprentice is spoken only once. Make someone disappear. He is not told who. He is only given a description: a man with a crooked back who sells false relics outside. The church. The man is not a noble, not a knight, not even dangerous, but he is marked. Moth follows him for 3 days, observes his routine, sees him argue with customers, sees him curse a beggar, sees him weep when he thinks no one is watching. On the 4th day, Moth acts: a needle dipped in belladonna, a handshake during a coin exchange. The man collapses before sundown. His death is ruled natural. Moth returns in silence. There is no ceremony, no applause, only a voice in the dark. Now you are one of us. But in the hours that follow, as Moth scrubs the dirt from beneath his nails, something strange creeps in. He thinks of the man's tears. He wonders if the relic seller had a son, or if someone will bury him. He should not care. He knows this. Emotion is weakness, but the feeling lingers like a shadow at his feet. That night, he dreams of a forest with no end, and in it, he is the only one who cannot find his way home. By the age of 12, Moth no longer flinches at death. He has watched poison take breath from lungs, blades spill blood in alleyways, and ropes squeeze the final whisper from the mouths of targets. But the kill is never the hardest part. It's the pretending. Missions now demand more than stealth. They require masks, not physical ones, but identities. Moth must now become a farmer's son in one village, a mute chimney sweep in another, a monk's apprentice in a third. He must not only enter unnoticed, he must belong. Each identity requires study. What tools does a cooper use? How does a merchant count coin? What prayers does a priest whisper at dawn? The wrong answer could mean a knife to the throat. One mistake almost costs him everything. Sent to a port city under the name Lior, he works as a servant in the household of a merchant, suspected of selling information to foreign kingdoms. His task is simple: locate the hidden letters and report who receives them. But the merchant has a daughter, Eliora. She is clever, watchful, and unafraid to ask questions. "You're too quiet for a boy who grew up near the sea," she tells. Him on his second day, Moth shrugs, and you don't flinch when father yells. Servants always flinch. He doesn't respond. By the third week, Eleora has caught him twice sneaking into restricted rooms. Once he claims he's lost. The second time, he lies better, says he was chasing a rat. She doesn't believe him, but she doesn't tell either. Then, one rainy evening, she finds him in the library, reading the map hidden behind the merchant's personal crest. "You're not who you say you are," she says softly. Moth doesn't move, doesn't reach for his knife, doesn't run. She studies him, her expression unreadable. "I won't tell," she finally whispers, "but you'll owe me one day." Moth escapes the city before dawn. Mission complete. The letters were passed through coded symbols on trade manifests. He leaves the report behind in the usual drop point, but for weeks after, Eleora's words haunt him. "You'll owe me one day." Emotions are dangerous. They weaken focus, blur edges, invite doubt. But the memory of her eyes, knowing, unafraid, burns deep. Back at the keep, a new master arrives, a man with a foreign accent and a face marked by scars. He calls himself Master Ulrich. He doesn't train them with whips or silence. He uses stories. "In the East," he says, "they train killers by teaching them to be artists first. You must understand life before you take it." The others scoff, but Moth listens. Ulrich teaches deception as theater, movement as choreography, death as poetry. "You are not just assassins," Ulrich tells them. "You are ghosts, masks that wear masks." Moth thrives under Ulrich's lessons. He becomes faster with disguise, smoother with his words. He learns to manipulate, not through fear, but trust. He infiltrates a noble's kitchen, then earns the trust of the steward. He poses as a scribe, then rewrites a nobleman's will with forged ink. He even performs a false execution. His blade, coated in sleep draft, the victim hidden safely in the forest, the crowd none the wiser. He has become more than an assassin. He has become a tool of narrative, a shadow that bends truth. But even the best shadow can falter in the wrong light. One winter, Moth is tasked with intercepting a royal envoy and replacing him. The goal: attend a secret meeting disguised as the envoy and learn the names of traitorous lords. Moth studies the envoy's habits, mimics his gait, learns the cadence of his speech. But when he arrives at the manor, he finds the meeting already begun. And something is wrong. One of the lords, a tall man with a hunting scar, stares too long. He asks questions not even the real envoy would know. Moth answers carefully. But it's not enough. Later that night in his chamber, a knock comes. Not from a servant, not from a guard, from a child, a small boy no older than 7 with wide eyes and trembling hands. "They told me to give this to you," the boy whispers. Holding out a slip of parchment, Moth takes it, unfolds it, and reads 2 words. "You're known." He doesn't wait. He escapes through the window, climbs down the outer wall, and disappears into the forest, with only his satchel and blade. Back at the keep, the masters say nothing of his failure. They knew the risk. Every mission is a game of inches. But they do give him a new scar, a thin cut across his right hand, a reminder, a price. The wound heals slowly. He trains through the pain, and as he does, he carves the lesson into memory. Even the best masks crack. Trust no face, not even your own. Winter is cruel in the north. The rivers freeze. Wolves come closer to the villages. People vanish, some to starvation, some to darker things. But in the keep where Moth trains, the cold is not the enemy. Complacency is. By now, Moth is 15. Winter's old, taller, quieter, more dangerous. He no longer reacts to screams in the night. He no longer looks away from corpses. His hand is steady. His voice, when needed, can charm or terrify. But something has changed in the keep. There are fewer apprentices. Missions have become bloodier, and a rumor spreads through whispered lips. A traitor walks among them. The masters deny it, but denials in this place mean little. One morning the courtyard is covered in snow, fresh, untouched, and in the center lies a body. Face down, arms twisted unnaturally. A trail of blood carving red into white. The body is Sedge, a boy who once shared Moth's cell. A sign is pinned to his back. Lied to the Brotherhood. No trial, no explanation, just an example. Moth does not blink, but that night he sharpens his blade twice. A week later, Master Ulrich calls him privately. His tone is softer than usual. There's weight behind his words. There is talk of a rebellion, he says. Some apprentices believe they can escape, that there's life beyond this. Freedom. He pauses. If you hear anything, tell me. Moth nods, says nothing, but in his gut he feels the balance shift. There is talk, there is unrest, whispers in the dormitories, quiet plans beneath floorboards. Some speak of fleeing to the mountains, others dream of crossing the sea. Fools, most of them, but not all. One night, Moth is approached by Ash, the boy who never cried. You've heard, haven't you? Ash says. They're planning to make an example of someone else. Moth shrugs. It's always someone. Ash leans closer. Not this time. They've picked a name. Moth looks at him. Ash doesn't blink. It's you. For the first time in years, Moth feels something close to fear, not because he doubts his skill, but because he knows this place. If they've decided to eliminate him, they won't fail. He asks no questions. He starts preparing. He buries false documents in a tree outside the walls. He leaves coins beneath a loose brick near the southern tower. He sharpens 4 throwing knives and hides 2 in his boots, 1 in his sleeve, and 1 in his bedroll. And then he waits. 3 nights later, the trap is sprung. He's summoned to the training hall after midnight. Alone. There are no torches. Lit. Only a single candle on the floor. A master stands in the shadows. Not Ulrich, one of the older ones, the cruel kind. Your last mission failed, the man says. Moth doesn't reply. You allowed yourself to be seen. You let a child deliver a warning. Do you think that's acceptable? Still silence. The master steps forward. You've grown soft. You care about too much. From the darkness, more shadows emerge. 3 apprentices, older, strong, armed. This is not discipline, it's execution. Moth acts before they do. He blows out the candle and becomes Shadow, steel flashes in darkness. Footsteps echo. A blade sings, a scream cuts short. Moth fights not with fury, but with clarity. He counts breaths, measures angles, moves like smoke through cracks in stone. When light returns, he is alone. One apprentice bleeds out. Another crawls. The third has vanished. The master is gone. Moth runs, not away from the keep, but into it. Through secret halls, past training chambers, into the lowest levels where old records are kept. He doesn't know what he's searching for. Maybe answers, maybe proof. What he finds is a ledger, names, missions, failures, deaths, and beside his own name, something written in red, to be eliminated. Too independent, unreliable, he stares at the words, and something inside him breaks. They were never training him to be free. Only useful. Useful. Until he wasn't. When he leaves the keep that night, he doesn't go quietly. He sets fire to the old chapel, cuts ropes that hold the eastern gate, leaves false trails into the swamp. The keep does not burn to the ground, but it bleeds. Moth disappears into the snow, hood pulled low, breath misting in moonlight. He is no longer an apprentice, no longer a ghost of someone else's will. Now, he is something else, a shadow with no master, and for the first time he walks not in silence, but with purpose. Winter turns to spring, and still no one speaks the boy's name. Moth, if he even calls himself that anymore, has vanished beyond the boundaries of the Brotherhood's reach. His trail is hidden under weeks of storms, broken branches, stolen clothes, and blood that no longer belongs to him. In the world beyond the keep, he becomes myth before he becomes man. But myths, like ghosts, tend to linger where wounds remain. In the mountain passes, whispers speak of a traveler with no past, who outdrinks mercenaries and outpaces wolves. In the freeholds, barmaids tell stories of a pale-eyed boy who stares too long and disappears when the candle flickers. Along the southern roads, bounty hunters speak his name in hushed curses, trading tales of silver coins offered for his head. The Brotherhood has not forgotten. They've simply changed tactics. Instead of open pursuit, they let the world do their work. They spread rumors, forge crimes, brand him a traitor, a killer, a madman. Soon local lords post signs with his likeness, a sketch half true, half wild guess. Wanted, the ghost with moth's eyes. But the hunted learns faster than the hunters. Moth adapts. He no longer hides in plain sight. Now he becomes other people. A mute herdsman in the highlands, a chimney boy in the capital, a stuttering friar in a border village. He changes hair color, gait, posture. In one town he is left-handed. In the next he walks with a limp. He is everywhere and nowhere, and while he hides, he watches. He watches as the Brotherhood expands southward under a new name, the Hollow. Hand. They don't wear the old symbols. They wear civility like a mask now, posing as advisors, protectors, priests. But their methods remain. Poison, fear, control. Moth begins dismantling them. Quietly, he intercepts a caravan carrying coded messages, alters the letters, sends them back with wrong dates and false names. He slips into a gathering of minor lords where a Brotherhood agent plans to strike and poisons the wine before they arrive. He frees a merchant's son marked for recruitment, burning the branding irons in the courtyard as he leaves. Each act is a warning, but one job changes everything. In a northern city near the frost line, he learns of a man named Corvin, a veteran assassin turned noble's bodyguard. The man is rumored to be behind the capture and breaking of dozens of children used by the Hollow Hand. Moth travels north. He studies Corvin for weeks, watches his routines, notes every twitch of the man's sword hand, every scar on his temple. He sees how Corvin sleeps with his boots on, how he speaks to no one except the noble's dog, and how his blade never leaves his belt. He also sees something familiar, the hollow stare, the precision, the absence of hesitation. He is what Moth would have become if he hadn't burned the keep. To defeat Corvin, Moth cannot fight him head-on. He creates a new identity, a boy named Therin, a noble's page. He wins favor, learns the layout, gains Corvin's mild suspicion, but not his hostility. Then, one evening, Moth plants the seed. He leaves a coin, a Brotherhood coin, in Corvin's chamber. Corvin finds it, and he panics. The man tears apart his own room, interrogates servants, even threatens the steward. For the first time, Moth sees the assassin afraid, not of a boy, but of being seen. When they finally meet, truly meet, it is in a courtyard just before dawn. Snow falls gently, torches flicker, no words are spoken. Two blades are drawn. Corvin moves first, fast, low, ruthless, but Moth is faster, not in skill, not in strength, but in intention. He wants more than victory. He wants to end the cycle. He takes wounds, deep ones, a cut to his ribs, a slice across the thigh. But he presses forward, trading pain for position, blood for leverage. He disarms Corvin and stares him in the eyes. "You don't have to die," Moth says. Corvin says nothing, but in the end it doesn't matter. He lunges one last time, and Moth ends it. He takes Corvin's ring, the signet of a master assassin, and breaks it in two. That night, he ties the halves to a raven's leg and sends it west, back to the Hollow Hand. No message, no signature, just silence. After that, the bounties disappear. The Brotherhood retreats deeper into shadows. They know now, the boy they trained is not just alive, he's awakened. And he has his own mission, not revenge, not redemption, correction. From that day forward, Moth only accepts contracts that balance the scale. Corrupt lords, slavers, child snatchers, torturers in noble clothes. He never stays long. He never repeats a disguise. He never forgets a face. One evening in a quiet riverside town, he sees a girl selling fruit, Eliora. She looks older, sharper, still watching, still unafraid. He approaches the stand, says nothing. She hands him a pear. "You owe me," she says, just loud enough. He nods, takes the pear, and walks on. The shadow continues, but this time it moves toward the light. The snow was thin that year, not soft, not clean. Just a half-frozen smear of dirt and wind-pressed ash along the valley floor. It crunched underfoot like dry bone, the kind of snow that told you spring had given up trying and winter had overstayed its welcome. Moth stood at the edge of the ridge, cloak stiff with old blood, staring down at the town of Belgrave. He had been here before, once, long ago, back when his name meant nothing. A ghost in training, a silent shadow watching from rooftops as the Brotherhood made its first deals in the south. He had been too young then to understand what was being sold. Now he knew. The Brotherhood wasn't trading coin, they were trading faith. In the town below, the bell rang 7 times, a deep, sonorous toll that echoed across the valley and rattled the teeth in Moth's skull. He clenched his jaw and stepped back from the ledge. That sound again, the same one that had haunted him in dreams for the last 2 winters. The sound that marked executions, cleansings, and sermons twisted into control. It was time. He adjusted the wraps around his hands, flexed his fingers, and checked the weight of the blade hidden along his back. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the scent of burning incense and boiled barley. Belgrave was awake, and it was waiting for him. The cult called themselves the Bell of the Hollow now. They dressed like priests, spoke like poets, and ruled like tyrants. They had taken the Hollow Hand's cruelty and dipped it in honey. Where once they used pain, now they used guilt. Where they once used whips, now they used scripture. But Moth remembered the truth. He had seen the hands behind the curtain. He had heard the screams behind the chants, and he had returned to silence them. He walked the outer ring of Belgrave as dusk fell, moving like a shadow between stone walls and cloaked pilgrims. They wore white robes now, not black, with silver. Bells sewn into the hems. The bells jingled softly as they moved, meant to bring peace, they said. Moth only heard warnings. He marked the guards. 6 at the gate, 4 on the walls, 2 at the chapel door. The real threat, though, hid within. Master Ulrich, once a high priest of the Brotherhood, now the high seer of the Bell. Moth remembered his voice. Calm, deep, persuasive, a voice that could make cruelty sound like compassion. Moth entered the city under a borrowed hood, carrying no name and no past. He spent 3 days mapping the place, 3 nights watching the guards change shift, counting the torches, noting the alleyways and rooftops. On the 4th night, he moved. First, the grain stores. He poured oil into the dry hay, wrapped it with pitch-soaked cloth, and left a trail to the forge. Then the water tower. He dropped crushed valerian root and black moss into the well. Nothing deadly, just enough to make stomachs churn and heads spin. Finally, the bell tower. He climbed the outer wall, scaling cracks in the stone. He reached the highest beam, tied a noose from a banner rope, and hung a bundle from it. A black robe, a Brotherhood ring, and a silver bell split clean down the middle. A message. By dawn, Belgrave was in chaos. The grain had caught fire. The water was poisoned, the bells rang out of tune, and Ulrich knew. He called for calm, ordered prayers, declared a fast, but his eyes betrayed him. He knew who had returned. That night, during the feast of devotion, as hundreds of followers knelt before the altar, Moth walked through the cathedral's front doors. He did not hide. He wore his old cloak, burnt, torn, stitched back with memories. He walked with purpose down the center aisle toward the man who had once taught him how to kill without remorse. Ulrich raised his hands. "My child returns," he said. But Moth didn't kneel. "I was never your child," he said. "I was your weapon, and I broke." The silence after those words was louder than the bells. Ulrich dismissed the congregation with a gesture. They fled like sheep, sensing the wolf's breath. Only 2 men remained. They fought beneath stained glass and holy light. Ulrich was older, slower, but he fought like a snake, twisting, spitting, trying to strike when unseen. But Moth had learned patience. He parried, dodged, waited. When Ulrich reached for the hidden blade behind the altar, Moth kicked the table into him. The old man stumbled. The blade fell. Moth stood over him. "You can beg," he said. Ulrich spat. "I'll return," he said. "Even if not me, others. There will always be someone." Moth nodded. "Yes," he said, "but not today." He turned away, poured oil across the floor, lit a match, and walked out as the cathedral burned behind him. The next morning the bells of Belgrave did not ring, and in their silence the people found something new: peace. Moth left before noon. He didn't wait for praise. He didn't listen for cheers. He vanished into the woods again. But something had changed. He no longer walked alone. In the shadow of that broken bell, a new circle formed. Quiet hands, sharp eyes, soft steps. Not assassins, watchers, defenders. They had no names, no uniforms, no banners, only one truth. We do not serve kings, we serve balance. And at the center of them, always moving, always watching, walked the boy who had once been nothing but a tool. Now he was the hand that broke the bell, and the silence that followed was his anthem. It began with a rumor, a whisper in a tavern, a story shared by travelers beside dying fires, a name spoken only once, and then only in a whisper. The silent circle. Some said they were ghosts, others claimed they were monks. A few swore they were demons in disguise, but the truth was stranger than all of it. They were watchers. They came at night when tyrants slept soundly and slavers locked their chains tight. They left no bodies, no blood, only silence. A lord who beat his servants found, his whip coiled into a knot and hanging over his bed. A corrupt mayor who taxed orphans found his treasury emptied, replaced by moths pressed into wax. It was happening across the freeholds, from frost-bitten fortresses in the north to swamp cities in the south. A pattern emerged, then a fear. The nobility started to whisper too. There is something in the woods, something in the dark. But they could never agree on who or what led the circle. Only one detail came again and again. He walks in silence, and where he steps, the old ways fall. Moth had changed. He no longer struck from vengeance, no longer hunted those who reminded him of pain. Now he moved by choice, with purpose, not alone. He had trained 6 others, not killers, survivors. The first was Aya, a thief who'd been beaten half to death for stealing bread. She learned to move without sound, to disappear into crowds, to use shadow like a blade. Next came Bran, once a scribe who had watched soldiers burn his scrolls and blind his master. He had a memory like whetstone, impossible to erase. Moth taught him how to turn that memory into foresight. Then Kesh, a former child soldier from the salt mines, who had forgotten what it meant to live. Moth taught her how to breathe again before teaching her how to fight. Each of them brought pain. Each of them found a way to turn it into strength. But none called themselves assassins. They were not servants, not agents, not soldiers. They were the Circle, and they chose their own path. Together, they walked the shadow roads, paths that ran beneath the feet of kings and above the reach of guards. Coded messages passed through carvings in old trees. Safe houses were marked by iron rings, buried near hearthstones. Their work was quiet: disrupt supply lines to starving villages, free children from noble-owned pits, humiliate powerful men without drawing a drop of blood, and if a killing had to happen, it was decided together. No one gave orders, no one obeyed. But in time, the Circle faced its greatest challenge, not from without, but from within. It began with Kesh. She had been sent to investigate the Lord of Thornbridge, a cruel man who ran a prison disguised as an orphanage. But when she returned, she came back silent. Distant, hardened. She had killed him, yes, but she had also burned the building. Guards, servants, records, gone, and children too. It had not gone as planned. The Circle met beneath a ruined chapel in the withered hills. Tensions ran high. Aya demanded answers. Bran spoke of lines they had agreed never to cross. Moth listened. In silence, Kesh defended herself. She spoke of chaos, of a riot she couldn't control, of a system too corrupt to dismantle without fire. But Moth heard something else, something he recognized. The same fire that had once lived in him, the fire that consumed. He knew then they had to change again. Over the next year, Moth changed the Circle. They no longer trained just to fight. They trained to understand politics, history, trade, the ways power moved, not just swords and poisons, but debt, marriage, hunger. They became not just ghosts in the dark, but mirrors held to broken systems. They began to write, scrolls hidden in libraries, codes planted in sermons, stories told to children that carried seeds of resistance. The nobility no longer feared blades, they feared ideas, and from the edges of the empire a new legend grew, not of a killer, but of a circle that could not be bought, broken, or buried. And, always, always, at the edge of that legend, walked the man with no name, the boy who became a ghost, the blade that never rang, Moth. And as his shadow passed through cities and forests, prisons and palaces, one truth remained. Where he walked, oppression withered, and the silence that followed was the sound of chains breaking. It began with a rumor, a whisper in a tavern, a story shared by travelers beside dying fires, a name spoken only once, and then only in a whisper. The Silent Circle. Some said they were ghosts, others claimed they were monks. A few swore they were. demons in disguise. But the truth was stranger than all of it. They were watchers. They came at night when tyrants slept soundly and slavers locked their chains tight. They left no bodies, no blood, only silence. A lord who beat his servants found, his whip coiled into a knot and hanging over his bed. A corrupt mayor who taxed orphans found his treasury emptied, replaced by moths pressed into wax. It was happening across the freeholds, from frost-bitten fortresses in the north to swamp cities in the south. A pattern emerged, then a fear. The nobility started to whisper too. There is something in the woods, something in the dark. But they could never agree on who or what led the circle. Only one detail came again and again. He walks in silence, and where he steps, the old ways fall. Moth had changed. He no longer struck from vengeance, no longer hunted those who reminded him of pain. Now he moved by choice, with purpose, not alone. He had trained 6 others, not killers, survivors. The first was Aya, a thief who'd been beaten half to death for stealing bread. She learned to move without sound, to disappear into crowds, to use shadow like a blade. Next came Bran, once a scribe who had watched soldiers burn his scrolls and blind his master. He had a memory like whetstone, impossible to erase. Moth taught him how to turn that memory into foresight. Then Kesh, a former child soldier from the salt mines, who had forgotten what it meant to live. Moth taught her how to breathe again before teaching her how to fight. Each of them brought pain. Each of them found a way to turn it into strength. But none called themselves assassins. They were not servants, not agents, not soldiers. They were the circle, and they chose their own path. Together, they walked the shadow roads, paths that ran beneath the feet of kings and above the reach of guards. Coded messages passed through carvings in old trees. Safe houses were marked by iron rings, buried near hearthstones. Their work was quiet: disrupt supply lines to starving villages, free children from noble-owned pits, humiliate powerful men without drawing a drop of blood, and if a killing had to happen, it was decided together. No one gave orders, no one obeyed. But in time, the circle faced its greatest challenge, not from without, but from within. It began with Kesh. She had been sent to investigate the Lord of Thornbridge, a cruel man who ran a prison disguised as an orphanage. But when she returned, she came back silent. Distant, hardened. She had killed him, yes, but she had also burned the building. Guards, servants, records, gone, and children too. It had not gone as planned. The circle met beneath a ruined chapel in the withered hills. Tensions ran high. Aya demanded answers. Bran spoke of lines they had agreed never to cross. Moth listened. In silence, Kesh defended herself. She spoke of chaos, of a riot she couldn't control, of a system too corrupt to dismantle without fire. But Moth heard something else, something he recognized. The same fire that had once lived in him, the fire that consumed. He knew then they had to change again. Over the next year, Moth changed the circle. They no longer trained just to fight. They trained to understand politics, history, trade. the ways power moved, not just swords and poisons, but debt, marriage, hunger. They became not just ghosts in the dark, but mirrors held to broken systems. They began to write, scrolls hidden in libraries, codes planted in sermons, stories told to children that carried seeds of resistance. The nobility no longer feared blades, they feared ideas, and from the edges of the empire a new legend grew, not of a killer, but of a circle that could not be bought, broken, or buried. And always, always, at the edge of that legend walked the man with no name, the boy who became a ghost, the blade that never rang, Moth. And as his shadow passed through cities and forests, prisons and palaces, one truth remained. Where he walked, oppression withered, and the silence that followed was the sound of chains breaking. The empire had not forgotten. Far beyond the edges of the freeholds, past the snow-choked frost-spire mountains, and over the salt-crusted deserts of Dry March, the heart of the old world pulsed, cold, calculating, and eternal. To its high lords, the circle was not an enemy, it was a virus. It infected systems, disrupted tradition, and threatened not only law, but belief. The nobility called it rebellion, the clergy called it heresy. But the people had a different word: hope. The court of imperial harmony was a place of stillness, a vast hall of glass and bone, where statues of past rulers whispered lessons to those who dared to walk barefoot beneath their gaze. Here, the High Chancellor received a scroll, black wax, sealed with the sigil of a moth. No title, no return. He read it alone, in silence. Its message was simple. We do not seek war, but we will not watch in silence. End the chains, or they will break without you. The Chancellor did not speak. He simply reached for a single black ribbon, the symbol of highest threat. By nightfall, emissaries rode in 7 directions. Each bore a name. Each name was a death sentence. They were not soldiers, not knights. They were the regretless, an ancient order raised not to rule but to remove. 7 blades, 7 doctrines, 7 deaths waiting to happen. Whisper Steel, the silent fang, trained in breathless death and listening for pulse changes through walls. Brother Ash, a pyromancer in priest's robes, who made sermons out of screams and prayers. Out of arson, the Ember Twins, fused by a soul pact. Their blades sang in harmony and struck in tandem. Dame Grieve, master of poisons that killed slowly, where remorse lingered as long as the breath. Master Thorn, a scholar of cruelty who mapped pain like a cartographer, Blackhall, whose mask turned truth into terror. His voice mimicked your loved ones just before he struck. And finally Red Vow, the only one who had killed a king and left the crown melting on his tongue. The Empire sent all of them, but none returned the same. Meanwhile, Moth saw the pattern. He had learned long ago. Empires are machines. You do not defeat machines by throwing rocks. You corrode them from within. So the circle evolved again. Each cell went dark. No leaders, no trails. Every village, town, and hamlet received whispers, ways to disappear, ways to resist, ways to remember, scrolls hidden in bread ovens, maps painted onto children's toys. Rebellion became folklore, and folklore, when repeated enough, becomes truth. The regretless began their hunt. Whisper Steel arrived in Ashdale first. She found a manor filled with mannequins wearing masks of circle members. Each mannequin held a scroll. "Did you think we wouldn't know your name?" She left broken, whispering to herself. Brother Ash raised 3 villages seeking ear, but all he found were bells that rang backward and children singing songs about his mother's sins. He fled into the marshes. No one ever saw him again. The Ember Twins were lured into the shifting forest, where the trees remembered. They vanished beneath roots and leaf, their laughter echoing into nothing. Dame Grieve released a toxin into a market, only to find it reversed upon her by a circle apothecary. She awoke to a world where her limbs had forgotten her. Master Thorn nearly succeeded. He caught Bran, he bled him, asked questions. Bran answered with a smile, then handed him a scroll. Inside, moths, black, alchemical, burning. Thorn screamed until he was only a shadow etched into the wall. Only Red Vow remained. But Moth found him, on a broken ship moored in the fog-choked port of Deadwave Harbor. They sat together. Tea steamed between them. They did not speak of war, nor of death. Moth asked one question. "When did you forget your name?" Red Vow didn't answer. But when he left the harbor, he dropped his sword into the sea, and he walked west into silence. The Empire did not send more killers. It sent a message. "We will not forget this," Moth replied. "We are counting on it." The circle changed again. No more symbols. No more formal messages, just actions. Bread delivered without a name, a whip missing from a slaver's hand, a noble's ledger rewritten with debts owed to the poor. No blood, only truth, only consequence. The legions came, finally, tens of thousands, marching into cities with banners of iron. But they found empty streets, and behind them, doors closed but eyes open. Children mimicking the symbol of the moth in chalk on walls. Old women humming songs that made soldiers forget why they fought. Resistance no longer needed faces. It was the wind, the song, the silence, and in every corner of the land someone whispered, "The circle walks still." And the Empire, for the first time in centuries, remembered what it felt like to be afraid. It began not with war, but with forgetting. History, once chiseled into marble and sung by elders around fire, was replaced by ledgers, censored sermons, and gilded lies. The Empire did not just rewrite the past. It buried it, and in doing so, it created something far more dangerous than rebellion: remembrance. Across the broken kingdoms, the circle planted seeds, not in fields, but in memory. Old tales were restored, true names unearthed, forgotten places mapped again by moonlight and instinct. There were those who remembered the days before chains, before taxes bound the soul, before speech was weighed and measured. They became the first kindlers. Their job was not to kill, it was to remember. Ear traveled to the ruins of Caelira, once a city of song and stories. She found only stones and dust, but beneath the shattered amphitheater, She discovered something the Empire had never found. A hidden vault. Inside were scrolls, instruments, masks of silver and wood, the tools of the story keepers. She wept, not because of what was lost, but because she now held proof it had ever been. Real. She carried the scrolls on her back day and night through blizzards and silence. In each village she visited, she would find a child, kneel and whisper, "You must remember this, not for me, but for those not yet born." And the child would repeat it back, word for word. That was enough. In the salt-burned town of Merrow's Reach, Bran encountered a forgotten tower said to house the ghost of the last free historian. He entered, alone. The halls whispered names. Dust danced in the moonlight, and on the walls he found a mural, 1,000 names carved into stone by a single hand. He added one more, not his own. His father's. Then he lit a single lantern and left it burning. It burned for 7 days, then it vanished, but the names remained. They always would. Moth returned to the valley of unmarked graves. There, he lit fires for each of the nameless. One by one. He spoke no words, but the flames danced differently with every name he had never known, and the people who watched. Peasants, smiths, even a few deserter soldiers, they joined, not with swords but with silence. A silence that bound, a silence that remembered. Memory became movement. Children drew maps in ash. Fishermen sang songs in forgotten dialects. Wives stitched family crests into hidden corners of tunics. Symbols banned for 3 generations. Farmers left notes beneath river stones, written in codes lost to most, but not to the kindlers. Minstrels traveled under false names, carrying melodies thought erased. The Circle did not give orders, they gave memory, and that memory became fire. In the port city of Varland, once the capital of an independent archipelago, an old woman named Myreth climbed the broken bell tower. She had not spoken in 20 years. But that night, with the moon full and the air thick with storm, she rang the bell. Once, twice, 3 times. Each ring echoed through the city, not a call to arms, a call to remember. By morning the city guard had fled. The mayor resigned, and the people walked free, not because they fought, but because they knew who they were again. They stood in the streets, holding old songs in their mouths like blades. Not one strike was made, but an empire shook. The empire responded with confusion. There were no insurgents to execute, no manifestos to burn, only old songs sung in streets. Forgotten flags hung on washing lines. Inquisition squads were sent, but they found nothing, only stories. And stories are dangerous, because once you hear a true one, it cannot be unheard. So the Empire banned words, whole books burned, teachers arrested. Child was jailed for whistling an old funeral hymn. Libraries became prisons, and yet the stories still spread. In lullabies, in carvings, in games played by children who never knew their origin, as if their minds remembered what had been taken and refused to let it go. Then came the night of the reclaimed fires. Across 300 towns on the same night, bonfires erupted. In each, Relics once stolen by the Empire were returned to flame, banners, scrolls, toys, tools, not burned in anger, but in reclamation. Because when a story is taken from you and you set it alight yourself, it belongs to no one, but it cannot be stolen again. When the sun rose, smoke from every fire shaped the sky like script. The Empire read the message, "You do not own what we remember." And they trembled. In the north, Bran's sister Tella led a caravan of orphans into the Stormlands. Each child carried a stone, etched with a single word: truth. Name, laugh, home, begin, forgive. They placed these stones at crossroads, on mountaintops, by rivers, markers not for the dead, but for those still to come. When questioned by soldiers, Tella simply said, "We are building a road backward, so the future knows the way." And no sword was drawn against her. For even soldiers have names they wish not to forget. The Empire called it subversion. The Circle called it memory. But the people called it something older: freedom. Not the freedom of banners, the freedom of knowing your grandmother's name, the freedom to speak the old stories, the freedom to remember without fear. And in every town, on every wall, behind every eye that dared to hope again, a new phrase emerged: memory burns brighter than empire. And so it did. Because memory once kindled cannot be killed. It spreads, and from it, truth. From truth, fire. From fire, freedom. And from freedom, the beginning of the end. The Empire was no longer merely afraid. It was confused. How do you strike down a whisper? How do you cage a memory? How do you kill something that lives in silence, in song, in the spaces between words? The flames of remembrance had spread too far. But the Empire, bruised and bewildered, still had one weapon left: spectacle. They called it the Festival of Unity, a 10-day pageant of loyalty in the capital of Veridorn. Gold-laced flags, processions of elite soldiers, songs written by court poets who had never seen battle, choreographed cheers, curated history. All citizens were forced to attend, all schools were closed, all roads led to the capital. It was meant to erase the fire. Instead, it lit another. Ia arrived in Veridorn in the clothes of a seamstress, her scrolls hidden in fabric rolls. She was not there to fight. She was there to watch. Bran came as a carpenter's apprentice. He carried nails, wood, and a hidden carving, knife that had once belonged to his grandfather, a man executed for teaching children the wrong alphabet. Moth arrived with no cover at all. He simply walked through the gates at dawn and stared at the city's tallest tower until guards stopped looking at him, afraid he might be a ghost. The Circle had no plan for this, because the people had made one without them. On the second night of the festival, as the Emperor prepared to appear before the crowd, a child stepped onto the stage ahead of him. She was no more than 9. She wore no crown. She held no weapon, only a single, brittle piece of paper. She began to read. It was a list of names. Names of towns erased by the empire's wars, names of languages silenced, names of rivers redirected to feed noble estates, names of teachers, mothers, singers, names that no longer appeared in any book. The crowd was silent. She read 50 names before the guards reached her, and before they could take her, 10 more children appeared, then 30, then hundreds. Each carried paper, each read, not shouting, not chanting, just reading. The emperor never took the stage. He watched from a balcony as history overwhelmed spectacle. No army marched, no blade was drawn, and yet it was the greatest battle Veridorn had ever seen. By nightfall, no one sang the empire's songs. They sang lullabies. They recited poems that had never been written, but passed from mouth to mouth like torches in darkness. And the circle listened. They moved through alleys and quiet rooms, gathering stories, copying them, handing them off. A grandmother told Moth a myth so old it was only spoken in riddles. A tavern singer gave Aya a tune she had never heard, though it brought her to tears. Bran carved a story onto a bench. Silent, permanent, invisible to those who never looked closely. Even silence spoke, even walls remembered. In retaliation, the emperor ordered the ashing of the archives. Every public record hall in Veridorn was set alight. Flames rose 30 feet into the sky. It was meant as a warning, but people came to watch, not to mourn, but to remember. They brought stones etched with names. They placed them in the ashes. Some knelt, others sang, and when asked what they were doing, one woman replied, "We are planting books." That night it rained. The ashes turned to ink, and across Veridorn's streets strange black lines formed. Lines that, when traced, became words, when followed, became stories. The city had written itself anew. The empire tried again. It outlawed gatherings of more than 3 people. It banned all music without state approval. It reissued every textbook in the realm with new truths. But the people did not stop. They simply went quieter, quieter, and deeper. They hid songs in bread recipes. They buried messages in chessboards. They named animals after martyrs, so that every day a child somewhere whispered a rebel's name with love. They played games with secret rules that taught history and laughter. They remembered by living, and the circle watched as their role changed. From leaders to listeners, from architects to archivists, for resistance had evolved. It was no longer about survival, it was about story and stories. Once told, do not die, they settle, they seed, they bloom in silence, in music, in grief, in joy, and sometimes when least expected, they roar. In the ruined village of Marn, a man walked into the center square and recited the entire epic of the First Fire, a poem thought destroyed a century prior. He wore chains. He sang between tears. When soldiers came to arrest him, the crowd lifted him onto their shoulders and carried him to the hills. They renamed the road that day. They called it the Way of the Voice. The empire counted bodies. The people counted names. The empire erased laws. The people carved myths, and the circle, once a secret, now stood in daylight, unarmed, unafraid, unnamed, because they were no longer alone. They were everywhere and nowhere, as memory should be. Deep within the forgotten corners of the empire, far from the gilded palaces and towering citadels, lay a world unseen by those in power. A world inhabited by the shadows of the forgotten. They were not ghosts, though their names had been struck from the scrolls of history. Not spirits, though their lives had been erased by cruel hands. They were people, women, men, and children, whose very existence defied the Empire's cruel amnesia. Old Roran was one such soul. Once a revered scholar in the Royal Library, he had been cast out and branded a traitor. Now he dwelled in exile, living among the outcasts in a forgotten village hidden beneath dense, whispering trees. At night, by the flickering light of a small fire, he gathered children around him and spun stories. But these were no ordinary tales. They were the true histories of the Empire, stories forbidden by law, memories buried beneath layers of silence and fear. He taught the children to read the stars as guides to freedom, constellations not of royalty, but of rebellion and hope. He showed them how to listen to the wind, for it carried whispers from distant places where the spirit of resistance still burned bright. Meanwhile, in the bustling market town of Glendale, a group of weavers worked their looms in shadows. To the untrained eye, their tapestries were simply exquisite, adorned with patterns of flowers, animals, and landscapes. But woven within the threads were hidden messages, codes and maps, secret blueprints for escape routes, reminders of past battles, warnings of approaching dangers. Every thread was a lifeline, every knot a vow to never forget. Moth traveled tirelessly between these hidden places. Clutching a small leather-bound book, he recorded names and stories whispered to him by those who had been silenced. He met women who had given birth in the silence of oppression, men who sang lullabies not to soothe sleep, but to kindle courage, and children who knew secret paths not marked on any map. Each story he collected was a thread weaving together, a tapestry of memory no empire could unravel. Iya, ever diligent, copied forbidden scrolls by the faint glow of candlelight, her eyes tracing words long thought lost. Bran, her steadfast companion, carved symbols of hope into the beams and doorframes of houses, subtle signs of defiance to those who knew to look. Their work was quiet, but vital, a whispered heartbeat beneath the Empire's heavy footfall, the tea. Empire responded by sending spies and informers, creeping into villages, scrutinizing markets, questioning strangers. Yet the shadows were masters of silence. They spoke in riddles, vanished like mist in crowds, and communicated with signs known only to those forgotten by history. In the northern forests, a secret council met under the canopy of ancient oaks and pines. Among them was Tella, Bran's sister, a fierce and wise woman with eyes that burned with purpose. She spoke passionately of planting ideas alongside stones, cultivating a future where memory would be sharper than any sword, stronger than any army. They named their movement the Rooted Flame, for like fire, memory held the power to destroy and renew. Quietly, the rooted flame spread across villages, towns, and cities. Parents reclaimed old names for their children, reviving lost lineages. Gardeners planted herbs and flowers, named after heroes, who had been erased. Bedtime stories whispered of rebellion and hope, weaving lessons into lullabies. Even the Empire's soldiers, without realizing, hummed melodies steeped in secret meaning. One night, under the pale crescent moon, the rooted flame ignited a new kind of fire, a wave of handwritten letters flowing like a secret river through the realm, letters filled with hope, warnings, encouragement, and truths forbidden in public. Carried by merchants, pilgrims, wandering minstrels, these letters sparked courage in hearts weary from fear. The Empire, desperate to stem the tide, increased patrols, razed houses suspected of harboring rebels, and spread terror among the populace. Yet fear could not kill what was already invisible, what thrived in silence. In the stillness of night, the shadows gathered around fires that no empire could quench. They told stories with voices strong and clear. They sang songs born of grief and joy. They remembered because memory was more than mere resistance. It was survival, it was life, and above all, it was freedom. As the rooted flame spread like a secret wildfire across villages, towns, and hidden corners of the empire, the ruling elite in the capital grew increasingly anxious. Behind the high stone walls and beneath the vaulted ceilings of the imperial palace, a council of nobles gathered, their voices echoing with frustration and fear. Lord Malric, a grizzled veteran of many campaigns, slammed his fist against the oak table. This rebellion must be crushed before it grows beyond control. If we let it spread, the entire empire will burn. Across from him, Lady Selene, known for her keen intellect and calm demeanor, countered thoughtfully, "It is not merely rebellion we face, but a fire kindled in the hearts of the people. You cannot extinguish memory and hope with swords alone." Their debate stretched into the night, each noble wrestling with the reality that force alone could not suppress what had taken root deep within the people. A yearning for freedom, a reclaiming of lost stories and identities. Meanwhile, beyond the capital's walls, life simmered with quiet urgency. In small villages and scattered hamlets, whispered meetings took place beneath the cover of darkness. Farmers, who once labored in silence, now set down their tools to join gatherings where plans were made not just for survival, but for resistance. Blacksmiths forged weapons not for the Empire's army, but for their own hands. Blades sharpened, with a purpose beyond mere defense. Carpenters and weavers, tailors and bakers all found roles within the growing network, each contribution a vital thread woven into the fabric of rebellion. In the town of Glendale, Moth's arrival was met with a mixture of hope and urgency. He carried his leather-bound book, a collection of stories, names, and memories reclaimed from silence. As he spoke beneath the lantern light, villagers leaned in, absorbing tales of courage and loss, of heroes whose names had been erased by the Empire's cruel hand. Children listened wide-eyed, their imaginations ignited by tales of secret pathways through forests, hidden codes in tapestries, and songs that held hidden meanings. Elders nodded knowingly, remembering their own youth, when hope was a scarce but precious commodity. Iya and Bran had grown into leaders within the rooted flame. Their tasks had multiplied, from copying forbidden scrolls to carving symbols of hope into the doorframes of safe houses. They coordinated a web of safe passages and secret messages, their work a lifeline for those who dared to dream of a freer world. However, the Empire's spies were relentless. Whispered betrayals and shadows of doubt seeped into the movement. One such betrayal would lead to tragedy. In the small village of Havenbrook, nestled between rolling hills and ancient woods, a place known for its courage and quiet resilience, a gathering of rebels had convened. Plans were shared, hopes were renewed, and strategies forged by the flicker of candlelight, but the Empire was watching. One moonless night, soldiers descended upon Havenbrook with brutal precision. Torches set ablaze the thatched roofs. Cries of alarm shattered the stillness. Women, men, and children fled in terror, the night swallowing their footsteps as they scattered into the surrounding forest. Amid the chaos, Aya grabbed her precious scrolls and fled alongside Bran. Their hearts pounded not only with fear, but with a fierce determination. The forest embraced them, its thick canopy concealing their flight. Yet every shadow seemed fraught with danger, every rustle a possible pursuer. In a hidden glade, the survivors gathered, their faces streaked with soot and tears, but shining with unbroken resolve. Old Roran, frail yet spirited, raised his voice. They may burn our homes, but they cannot burn our memories. We carry the flame within us. Tella, Bran's sister, stepped forward. This night marks not the end, but a new beginning. The rooted flame will only grow stronger. We will rise from the ashes, fueled by our shared past and hope for the future. The raid on Havenbrook became a turning point. Word spread quickly, of loss, yes, but also of courage and unity. Across the Empire, more joined the rooted flame, inspired by the survivors' unyielding spirit. In the cities, merchants whispered of strange lights flickering in the forests. Travelers spoke of secret meetings where songs of rebellion were sung. Softly in the night, even some soldiers, weary of endless war and cruelty, began questioning their orders. Some whispered their doubts to trusted friends. A few quietly slipped away to join the cause. The Empire responded with increased brutality. Patrols intensified. Homes suspected of harboring rebels were burned, and fear was wielded like a weapon. But fear could not kill what thrived unseen. The rooted flame had become a storm, silent but unstoppable, gathering strength to sweep away the old order and ignite the dawn of a new era. It began with a letter, folded into the seam of a traveling cloak. No signature, no seal, just a line. Come to Ilvenhold, bring nothing but memory. Aya found hers tucked in the stitching of a market bag. Bran discovered his scrawled into the wood, grain of a rebuilt bench. Moth awoke with it pressed against his chest, carried by no wind, left by no hand. Ilvenhold. The name rang like a bell long buried. Not quite a city, not yet a ruin. A place the Empire had mapped and unmapped in its own contradictions. The legend said it had been burned twice, once by foreign invaders, once by the Empire itself. But embers remember, when they arrived, they did not speak. They walked the broken streets, now overtaken by wild gardens, Vines curled around old statues, trees grew through the cracked domes of forgotten halls, but the streets were swept, the stones were clean, and the silence was sacred. They were not alone. Hundreds had come. Scholars who had buried books in barrels of grain, blacksmiths who had forged secrets into hinges and locks, singers whose mouths had been sewn shut but found ways to hum through their teeth, and the children, always the children, running through the ruins as if they were playgrounds, reclaiming ghosts with laughter. Ilvenhold lived. Each night they lit a single fire, no great blaze, just a small patient flame, and around it they told the story, piece by piece. Never the same teller twice, one would begin. I remember the taste of ash when the Empire came to my village. Another would pick up. My sister and I learned to write in dirt, so the rain would wash away the proof. A third would whisper, my father hid stories in the knots of his fishing net. I can still trace them with my fingers. It went on for hours, then days, then weeks. Ilvenhold became the library the Empire could not burn. A library of living tongues. On the 30th night a question was asked, a small voice, trembling but clear. What do we do now? The silence that followed was deep. Not uncertainty, but reverence. Then Aya stood. She looked not at the fire, but at the gathered faces. We listened. Bran added, we gather. Moth with his ever-faint smile. We remember aloud. But it was a child, a girl with ink-stained fingers, who gave the answer they all felt. We teach. And so they did. Ilvenhold became a school. No books, no desks, no exams, only voices, only questions, only the gentle, stubborn act of remembering. Out loud, they taught names, old words, banned poems. They taught silence, how to speak without sound, how to shout without raising a voice. They taught craft, how to hide a history in a recipe, how to stitch a song into a hemline. And they taught listening, not just hearing, but truly receiving, because resistance was not only defiance. It was care, attention, witness. The Empire took notice. It sent no soldiers, no spies, just an edict. Ilvenhold is not real. It does not exist. Do not speak of it. Do not seek it. It is an illusion. The people laughed, not cruelly, but joyfully. For the moment a tyrant says a thing does not exist, it exists more powerfully than ever before. Ilvenhold became the heart of a whisper that spanned continents. The name painted on ships in invisible ink, sung in lullabies, woven into carpets, echoed in the cries of newborns. Ilvenhold was memory given form, and memory once rooted does not die. One evening, an old man arrived with a box. He said nothing. He placed it at the foot of the fire. When opened, it revealed ashes, nothing more. But as the firelight touched them, the ashes began to shift, forming shapes, letters, lines, a map, not of roads or borders, but of songs, stories, symbols, a cartography of memory. They copied it, passed it hand to hand, breathed it into the world. Child drew it on a wall with a stick. A merchant sang it in the spaces between market calls. A traveller traced it in the sand, then let the tide take it. Ilvenhold was no longer a place, it was a direction, a compass needle pointing toward preservation. The circle never claimed leadership again. They became stewards, keepers of the ember. Because revolution is not always a war. Sometimes it is a spark passed from palm to palm, quiet, but impossible to snuff out. Ilvenhold had taught them one final lesson. Memory thrives when shared. So the stories, once whispered in ruin, began to walk. Some traveled on feet, others on ink, some in melody, others in thread. But all carried the fire. Across the continent, a quiet revolution took root in the humblest of places. A tailor in Irel stitched resistance into royal banners. No one saw it. But if you turned the flag against the light, the thread shimmered into forbidden verses. A baker in Noma flavored her loaves with herbs from the graves of rebels, telling customers, "This one's a recipe from the old days." A fisherman in Elbra cast his nets only in certain patterns, his boat carving glyphs into the water each morning. They were not generals, not heroes, but they were weavers of memory, of meaning, of the invisible cords that bound the people to what had been. Lost, and to what still could be, Aya wandered now, not as a fugitive, not as a scout, but as a listener. She arrived in towns with no name and sat beside fires. Children would bring her trinkets, elders would bring her stories, and she would leave nothing behind except perhaps a new word, a new song, a new truth. Bran built again, not just homes, but sanctuaries. Places where walls were more than stone, they were archives. He used beams marked with carvings, hinges that clicked in code, bricks kissed with soot-inked initials. Each building told a tale, and only those who looked long enough could hear. It moth moved in shadows still, but not to hide, he taught. He taught thieves to steal back histories. He taught soldiers to question orders through rhyme. He taught the silent to speak in movement, gesture, dance. He called it echoing, the art of making silence loud. Then came the loomers. No one knew who they were or where they had come from. Some said they were once scribes. Others claimed they had been prisoners, taught patience in solitude. They carried no weapons, only frames of wood, thread, needle. They appeared in cities, in crossroads, in the deepest parts of forests, and they wove banners of scenes never painted, wove portraits of the nameless, the lost, and in the threads, if you looked closely, you could see text, lines from banned books, names stricken from records, jokes told by dissidents. Each tapestry was a library, and the empire couldn't burn what it didn't understand. Soon, inns began offering discounts to anyone who could recite an old poem. Blacksmiths began stamping resistance sigils onto horseshoes. Chandlers made candles that melted into verses. Children played a game with string. And fingers that told the entire history of the first fire. None of it was commanded. None of it was ordered. It simply was, like breath, like heartbeat. One day, a new traveler appeared in Ilvenhold. A girl, young, bright-eyed. She wore a cloak with a single curious patch, a flame inside a circle. She sat by the fire, and when asked her name, she only said, "I'm Thread," and she began to sing. The song had no melody they recognized, no words they had taught, but every face turned, every heart paused, because the song remembered. It carried echoes of lost mothers, forgotten rebellions, buried laughter. It stitched them together. And when she finished, she opened her cloak and revealed, inside, the lining was a map. Not of land, but of story. Tiny stitches charted the rise of a whisper, the fall of a statue, the day someone named a goat after a martyr and the empire lost its mind. And so Ilvenhold learned that the circle was not a group, not anymore. It was a pattern, a rhythm, a loom, and everywhere threads were being pulled, woven, linked, not to create war, but to mend, to repair what tyranny had frayed, to sew together a future from the scraps of the past. And though the empire still watched, still whispered, still warned, it feared most what it could not name, a world stitched awake. In time, the world began to shift, not with banners or armies, not with declarations from thrones, but with a quiet redrawing of what people believed was possible. The circle no longer needed meetings. It had become a current, a pulse, and into this pulse came a new kind of traveler, the cartographers of Ember. They arrived with no fanfare, no crests, no coins, no cores, only scrolls, ink, stories. They carried satchels filled with parchment, not maps of roads or kingdoms, but of dreams, stories, and resistance. One unrolled a scroll in a tavern, revealing a hand-drawn image of a grandmother sewing at dusk. Below it, in careful script, she remembered the old word for freedom and spoke it aloud. Another pinned their map to the wall of a mine shaft. It showed not tunnels, but every whispered tale told during long shifts underground. Another painted an alley with chalk, drawing a spiral of footprints that led to a verse. They tried to bury us, not knowing we were seeds. They were not artists. They were archivists of the unseen. One cartographer named Lynn created a map of smells. She brewed teas in abandoned wells, each one representing a story. Lavender for grief, sage for hope, ash for survival. Villagers came and inhaled memory. They walked away, remembering lives that were not theirs, yet somehow felt like home. Another, called Tov, built maps of echoes. He walked through ruins and recorded how voices bounced, then translated those echoes into notes. He played these on a wooden flute. Each tune told a journey, from silence to scream, from exile to return, from forgetting to fire. They did not all succeed. One cartographer tried to tattoo stories into skin, but found the ink too volatile, the tales blurred. Another attempted to train birds to sing the names of the lost, but the birds began inventing new names. Even failure became part of the cartography, because what mattered was not the perfection of the maps, but the persistence of mapping. The empire grew anxious, not because of rebellion, but because it was being forgotten. Its statues stood in silence. Its edicts were parodied in puppet shows. Its generals became metaphors in bedtime stories. Power was slipping, not from force, but from relevance. And when power becomes irrelevant, it begins to unravel. The cartographers never said where they came from. Some were young, some ancient. Some wore cloaks, others wore nothing but threadbare tunics and knowing smiles. They never asked to be followed, but people did. Not in droves, not in mobs, but one by one. A potter in Brawl who started carving secret poems beneath her bowls. A sailor who left notes in bottles that washed up with tales of invisible cities. A shepherd who taught sheep to step only in patterns that spelled old dialects into the hillside. They weren't cartographers by trade, but they became maps, living, walking, burning. Ilvenhold, now more myth than place, still sent its fire. Every few months, a traveler would arrive at some far-off village and leave behind a scrap, a charcoal drawing, a fragment of song, a string tied in a way that, if you pulled just right, told a whole history. Some began calling it the Ember Network, others simply the Remembering. No names, no leaders, just the certainty that stories survive best when carried, and that those who carry them are never truly alone. One day, an emperor's portrait was found altered, not defaced, not mocked, but gently, lovingly embroidered. A tear at the eye, a flower at the lapel, a line beneath it. Even the cruel forget who they once hoped to be. That morning no arrests were made, no proclamations issued, just a silence. A long, deep, uneasy silence, for the Empire knew this was not rebellion, it was reclamation, and it could not be stopped, only mapped, only followed. The wind carried stories now, not just through mouths or parchment, but in the breath between conversations, in the hush before dawn, in the pause after a name. They began calling it the echoing. It wasn't organized. No one scheduled it. No one assigned roles, yet across scattered lands people began to speak in rhythm, like waves, not in unison, but in resonance. A widow in Drenna began to hum while she baked. Her tune was one once outlawed, but now played quietly in every alley. Children in Luth taught each other a game. Whisper what you remember. And if you didn't remember anything real, you were to invent it, so long as it could have been true. At the mouth of the river Rel, a boatman started carving his oar with scenes from dreams. He never spoke aloud, but each passenger left with a piece of the carving etched in their memory. In a nameless city near the old Imperial Road, a girl named Nere built a tower, not of stone, but of sound. She taught birds to carry tunes. Each morning, she'd whistle the first note and flocks would scatter, completing melodies in the air above. Travelers came just to hear. Some wept, not knowing why. The circle had changed. It no longer wore faces, no longer held seats. It was a rhythm. A thrum in the soles of the feet. It moved like firelight across a ceiling. Present, dancing, uncontainable. One evening, an old bell tower, long silent, began to toll. No one had touched it. No one had climbed its crumbling steps, but it rang, slowly, Once for each city the empire had erased, once for each language forgotten, once for each name struck from history. It tolled for hours, and when it stopped, even the birds were silent in that silence. People listened deeper than ever before, and they heard everything. Echoes began to respond to echoes. A grandmother in Varennes sang a lullaby that she said came to her in sleep. 3 weeks later, a merchant in the south claimed he dreamed the same song. In frost-covered hills, snow fell in patterns, spirals, waves, glyphs. People began to recognize these forms from tapestries woven centuries before, and in ruins once called Ardèche, a group of masons rebuilt a wall. But when they laid the final stone, the wind formed words through the gaps. We are still here. Not all echoes were peaceful. Some brought grief, like the moment when a young mother in care broke bread and whispered, "I am the last who remembers this recipe." Or when a teacher found a scroll tucked in a crack of a ruin, written in a tongue she once taught but no longer fully remembered. Echoes could cut. Because memory is not only comfort, it is also weight. But still, they held it together. And so, new rituals emerged, not decreed, not organized, but felt. Every seventh night across cities and valleys, people would light a single candle, place it in the window and sit in silence for 1 hour. During this hour, you were to remember one thing. The empire tried to take from you, and then share it with no one. Not yet. Just carry it a while longer like a coal. Waiting. Some began to write echo books. They were not published, not copied. Each was a single book, written by hand. The rule was simple. You could only write what had been whispered to you. Not shouted, not declared, only whispers. These books were bound in string, leaf, ash-dyed leather. They were hidden in roots under eaves, behind loose stones. But they found readers always. One echo reached the empire itself. A prince, barely of age, heard a melody in his sleep and woke weeping. He ordered his tutors to find the song. They couldn't. But that night, he opened the window of his chamber and whistled the first note. It was answered from the forest, from the dark, from memory. The emperor demanded silence, but silence had already become a language, and in that language people spoke. Volumes, because echoes, once loosed, do not return empty. They gather, they resonate, they remember.